This class is called the Data Life Cycle, and in this video, I'm going to introduce the data life cycle, although I'll start by saying that that's a misnomer. So the word the implies singularity, right? I am the professor of this course, but I'm a professor at Chadron State College. The data life cycle is not singular because there's no government body forcing everyone who does data analytics to do it in exactly the same way. Still, whoever you ask about the data life cycle, you're going to get similar answers back because everyone who does data analytics does ultimately have to do the same sort of thing. They have to collect data, they have to store data. So maybe maybe Google has one step and IBM takes that step and splits it into two different steps. But there's no controversy about what you're doing. And the version of the data life cycle I'm going to present comes from Google. Since there are more than one, I ought to say where I'm getting this from. So in this paradigm, the first stage of the data life cycle is to plan. And that makes sense, right? I mean, if you're doing data analytics, you're hopefully not just randomly poking around data sets. You've got some concrete question or business problem that you're trying to solve. So you consider the problem and you ask, well, what data do you need? How are we going to get the data? This is also the stage where you should ask questions about ownership and access. Who's going to keep the data once you do get it? And these stages all overlap and are kind of muddy. At some point, for example, you're going to have to ask how are you going to store the data? Are you going to store it in a spreadsheet? Are you going to store it in a database? That's a question you could ask during the plan stage. It's a question that might conceivably wait until the third stage where we talk about management. So these borders are porous. The second stage in this paradigm is capturing data. And this stage, we're not going to spend a lot of time in this course. The question of how do you design an effective survey, for example, is an extremely deep question that you can study if you're interested in our applied statistics minor. It's a little far afield from the data analytics side of things. We will talk a little about scraping, about getting data directly from a web page. So once you have the data, you have to manage it. And I mean, the most significant question here is the question of storage. You have to store it. And if you haven't decided how you're going to store the data back in the planning stage, you're going to have to now. This is also where Google's paradigm puts data cleaning, like making decisions about what to do with missing values or making decisions about what to do with clearly false values. Again, some paradigms of the data life cycle will have data cleaning as its own step. And since we've talked a little about privacy before, part of management is making sure that your data is secure and that only the people who are supposed to see it do see it. So analyze is the big one, but it's not the one that gets focused on in this class, precisely because it is the big one. There's a class on data analytics in R, and there's a class on Python, and you'll be taking theory of statistics. Data analysis is this entire minor. So it's not what we're focusing on in this particular class. Let's see. 5 is archive. So you've got the data and you've done your data analysis, and now what happens to the data? Well, a lot of big companies and small companies, I guess, are reluctant to just destroy data because, what if we have follow-up questions? What if, we do our analysis and we make our suggestion, and 2 months down the line, our suggestion isn't working, and we want to go back and look at the data again? So archiving data is keeping it available if necessary, but maybe not immediately available. And the concept is pretty clear, right? You put your spreadsheet on a disk somewhere and it goes into a dusty archive with a label on it. Or in the modern day, maybe we're archiving things digitally. Other times you do want to destroy data. And destroying data can come after archiving, right? I gave that example where we archive our data for a few months in case we need to come back to it, but we don't necessarily want that data floating around forever. What if it contains customer credit card information and there's a data leak and we get sued? We don't want sensitive information floating around if we can help it. So often the data analysts data life cycle, sorry. Often the data life cycle is going to end with the data being securely destroyed. And we don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but there is an art to destroying data. I mean, you perhaps know that if you just drag a file into your trash or your recycling bin and hit empty, the data is not being properly destroyed. So it's a little more complicated than that. But it's not something we necessarily need to spend a lot of time talking about in this class. And there's the data life cycle, by which I mean, again, one particular version of the data life cycle put forward by Google. Any company you work with that isn't Google might do things slightly differently, but they are ultimately going to have to do all these things.